What you do outside the home matters. It matters. It's so important. I can't even begin to describe how important it is because we see them 5% of the time and parents have them 95% of the time. So what you do matters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of my show. I'm your host, Jessica Moore, and today, y'all, I'm so excited because I have a very special guest who's coming on to discuss all things speech and language. So I was just scrolling through trying to figure out who was the best fit to come on and begin this conversation about speech. And I came across Miss Megan's platform. And y'all, I'm super excited. So her platform is called the SOP Next Door. She has a podcast. She's working on a handbook. You can also visit her website as well. But I'm going to let her go ahead and come up, introduce who she is and what she does. And then we're going to have a conversation about all things speech therapy. So without further ado, Megan, hi.
Hello. Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I know I briefly said a couple things that you do. So could you just introduce who you are and what you do in the world?
Sure. It's always so crazy whenever I hear people say all of the things that I'm doing at once because it's always like, whoa, who is that girl? Yeah. My name is Megan Peveto. I am a speech language pathologist from Texas. I have been in the world of speech therapy for about 12 years. I worked as an SLPA. I worked as an SLPA for 1 year before I went to grad school. And then after grad school, I spent some time in the schools. I've worked in the clinic setting. And now I'm doing some contract work in the home health side of things.
Yeah, so I know you mentioned you do a lot and when you hear it, so tell us a little bit about you have a handbook that's coming out.
Yes, actually, it's already been released. So you can purchase it. And then as I release the chapters, of course, the price goes up a little bit. So as long as you purchase it now, you get all of the updates for free, which is awesome because once it's completed, planning by the end of this year, we'll see. Of course, the price will stay what it is. But you get added to an email list and then you get all of the updates for free. And as of right now, this is how big it is printed out. So
Wow.
it's over 200. Yeah, it's over 200 pages of just typical language development because whenever I started working in the home health side of things, I quickly realized that we didn't learn enough about the toddler population in grad school. And they are not preschoolers, they are not school age, and they are not infants. They are their own set of little humans. And so I just thought if I'm struggling with it, I know others are. And that's how the handbook came to be.
So is the handbook, is it for providers or is it for parents? Can parents get the handbook?
Absolutely. I wrote it using and I say this gently, I wrote it using very easy terminology. So for all the medical terminology that's listed, it's also broken down in ways that people can understand. Because I know a lot of times whenever we're explaining things to parents and we use those big medical terms and those technical terms it's just like, what? That's a lot. So I just broke it down so that parents can understand it a lot better.
Okay, so I have had occupational therapists, BCBAs, and a few other type of providers come on. So you are my first
Wow.
SLP, yes,
Okay.
come on the show. So I made sure to take some notes on what to ask you because I'm like, I do not want to miss anything. So if y'all see me, anybody that's watching, you see me looking over here, it's because I have been listening to Megan's podcast and she is a wealth of knowledge.
Thank
Yes,
you.
I do have some notes over here. So the first thing I want to ask about, what is speech therapy? So I know it's like
That's a very broad term. And I will tell you off of that, I also have some things written down because I get very nervous public speaking. So if I look over there, that's what I'm doing too. Essentially, speech therapy is just working on another person's communication. Okay, let me just take that back. Because if you're working with adults, it can be anything from cognitive to communication. with swallowing and feeding in between. The same could actually be said about the smallest ones on our caseload. We work on their communication, we work on their language, we work on their cognitive skills. Sometimes they're feeding and swallowing. Speech therapy is a huge scope of practice. So whenever you come in, whenever we get asked that question, is which area do you want me to specifically talk about whenever it comes to speech therapy?
Yeah, mainly with toddlers.
Okay. With toddlers, it's really feeding and eating, and then language and communication. And then sometimes you get your articulation, which is your speech sounds, the way that toddlers say things. Their language development, of course, is going to be their understanding of language, their ability to express themselves. And then your feeding tends to go with like sensory issues or kids that have difficulties with swallowing.
Do you think that, like, because I know for me, I have a caseload of 100 children, and 75 of those kids have speech delays. So, do you think that it had anything to do with the pandemic? Like, why is it so many children? I'm getting referrals for speech delays every day.
Okay, so I actually did some research on this a couple of months ago because somebody else asked me that question. Whenever everything first happened with the pandemic, I had a sneaking suspicion that this was going to happen because you just can't help it, because so
Yeah,
much of communication development is social interaction and
yeah.
engagement, especially in those early years, that of course kids are going to be not exposed. So you're going to have some sort of deficits. And like I said, I had a sneaky suspicion that this was going to happen just because it's so important. So what I found in the research is that there were these language deficits before the pandemic. Of course, we had all of these situations going on. The difference is that for your kids that had that predisposition for their language delays, they were getting it elsewhere. Like you were getting it in the supermarket, at Walmart, waving to people in public, at daycares. All of those different places were actually helping these kids. And so whenever you take that away, it's going to have that negative impact on the children, because there were certain populations of kids that this affected more so than others. So it's not that it's more of a common problem now. It's just we see it more because
Yeah,
those kids that were being caught up in
yeah,
the daycares and your preschools and all of those things, now they're still behind because they were not exposed to that 2 years ago. If anything, I guess it's been 4 years now, but if anything, it showed us just how important those community programs are for the
yeah.
population in general, and getting together and interacting with one another.
So one thing that I was listening to you talk about and was linguistic versus Gestalt learners.
Yes. Okay. So
Understand what that is?
I think you mean analytic versus
Oh,
Gestalt.
I don't even know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I was not, and I'm not an expert at this. I will say there are several SLPs like Tara from Autism Little Learners and Meaningful Speech that have a plethora of information on this. So I
Okay.
will give an overview of it, but if your listeners are looking for more information on that, I highly recommend those two resources. Tara, especially for the younger population, because that's what she specializes in.
Yeah, and she'll be on the show in 2 weeks.
You got her. That's
Mhm,
awesome. Oh, she's
mhm,
wonderful. You're going to love Tara. Yeah, you are. Okay. So, analytic language learning is the way we typically learn language. We learn language as single word phrases, sentences, conversation.
mhm.
The Gestalt language processing, and I feel like I am butchering that name again, is sort of backwards, where they learn like phrases first of like their favorite shows and different common phrases that people say. And so you essentially have to work backwards. You start with those phrases and then you break it down into the single words.
Okay,
But
and
like I
then
said, she will definitely be able to go into much more detail about that.
yeah, okay, and then you also have a busy book. I think I just signed up for the download for the busy book. Yeah,
Yes.
okay. So can you talk? What is a busy book, and then why should kids have a busy book?
Okay, I love busy books. I was introduced to this concept whenever I became a mom myself, and I couldn't find one that I liked, so I made it myself because that's just what I do.
That's what we do.
What I like about these busy books, and the one I'm going to show you is not completed yet because I'm working on figuring out how to get these printed so I could sell them as copies. But as you can see, like on the front of this, it has we just have a bunch of different concepts in this one book. And the way that I created these, like your colors, and each of these has a removable piece to it. And so what I love most about these is that they're open-ended. Okay. And that means that you can target a variety of topics with these. With the colors, you can take your kids on a scavenger hunt throughout the room. Find all of these different colors. Let's see what else we've got in here. We have like farm animals. Now, I will say if you download the free version of this, it is not going to look like this one. Y'all are basically getting a preview of what the printed version will look like. So, ta-da, surprise. Yeah. So these will have the removable pieces as well of the animals. And while you're reading a farm animal book, you match the animals, you talk about the different sounds. We take the animals off and put them with a puzzle. You just sit and you just talk about what's on the different pages. And so what I like most about busy books, like I said, is that they're very open-ended. So you can just do just about anything with them that you can imagine, other than just sit and look at it. Now, something else that I like about the busy books too is that they keep the children occupied. So for the parents who need a break or are looking for something and they want something that's not screen time.
Yes.
Busy books.
That's what I was just thinking about when you said that. What age is the busy book for yours?
This one, geez, you can do up to supervised. I would say like you could start with your 1-year-olds or your kids. As soon as you start noticing that your little one is like able to match puzzle pieces and things like that, I think like as long as they're supervised and not eating the pieces, you can start as early as you want to.
Okay. And then what age does it go up to?
This has colors, shapes, numbers, letters, emotions, animals, weather. So it can go up as high as you need it to.
Okay. So another question that I had, I know you teach providers how to be good providers, right?
That's what we're working towards. Yes. Yes.
Okay, yes. Because I was gonna say, I know I seen something about that. I was
Yes,
listening.
that's the ultimate goal is for me to do that. So I just appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be here for it. And that's why I started the podcast.
I listened to some of your podcasts just talking about like things that providers can do to be good providers. So how did a parent know if somebody is a good provider? Like what should they look for in a provider?
Oh, I like this question. The first thing that I say about with parents is that their number one thing to remember is that they are in charge. I think a lot of times parents get intimidated whenever a professional comes in and it's not somebody that they necessarily jive with. And so they think, I don't really know what to do. But the truth is that it's your kid, it's your house. Yeah. If you're not comfortable, then you need to call the company and you need to tell them. As far as what to look for in terms of a good therapist, I would say make sure your therapist is like open to communication with you for sure. Answers your questions, takes time to explain what's going on, and just keeps that line of communication between you and them open. Now, that's not to say that if you don't have that right now, that doesn't mean your therapist isn't willing to do that. It could just be as simple as you just need to ask the questions and you need to start that conversation with them.
Yeah, it made me think about my daughter. She did early intervention. But when she did it, she's 13 now. I didn't even know that parents are supposed to be involved until my son got diagnosed with autism, and then they started giving me stuff. So with her, I took her to a speech therapist. They took her back. They did, and then she came back, and I'm like, okay, we tried again.
And yes, and I think that's something else that's important too, is that there are so many different aspects to speech therapy that you have your different settings, your different options that you can do.
Yeah.
The first would be like what you had with your son, which was ECI, where they come into the home, they have collectively, they have a group that does the intake where you meet your service coordinator, you meet all of these people on your team, and they all work together. Um, then you have what I work for, which is a private home health company, and we are not associated with ECI. And so if you have a private speech therapist coming into your home that way, you're just going to meet the therapist. And then that therapist, you may also have an occupational therapist, and you may also have a physical therapist. And they'll communicate with each other, but they won't necessarily come in at the same time. But they are coming into your home. And then the third option would be like it sounded like what you have with your daughter, where you went to a clinic. And it just depends on the clinic. In those situations, yes, they do pull the kids back to the room. But a lot of times clinics will also at the end of the session chat with parents and, give them strategies to use at home.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't even really just understand.
Yeah.
Like had I understood, you know what I'm saying, then I could have.
Yes. Yeah.
It's different. So what you saying about asking questions?
Yes.
And I know a lot of parents, especially like that I work with, they don't know what questions to ask or like what should be happening. So I think it's really good.
Absolutely. I think it's very important that if parents don't understand what's going on, they say that out loud. And I know it's very scary and it's intimidating because you have the therapist who's giving you all of these instructions and you have all of these things going on and you're just like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. It's okay if in that moment you tell your therapist, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm not really sure what to do. Can we maybe go through this again? Or can we try one or two things? I like to tell speech therapists, especially whenever we're working with new parents or parents who are brand new to like the services, is that start small. Like start with something easy that they can just implement and then work your way up from there. Because you do have some parents who right out the gate, you can give them a whole list of things to do and they're like, we're ready. But then you have the other side of that where you have the parents who are just, okay, what am I supposed to do here? Like, I don't really understand. And a lot of parents are somewhere in the middle. But I would say that if you have someone that you're confused, you don't understand what's going on, just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Because what is the worst that could happen? The therapist ignore you. If that's the case, that can lead to other situations, I suppose. I don't know. You don't want your therapist to ignore you, but if you're not getting what you need out of your services, that's why there's so many different agencies out there. And it's no different, I would say, than if you're not happy with your doctor.
Yeah.
You're not going to keep going back to the same doctor. You'll find somebody else.
And I know we were talking earlier about pediatricians and everything. So I'm going to rephrase the conversation a different way. How can parents who may suspect that their child has a delay or that their child's not doing something, what more can they do than just tell the pediatrician? So how can they take control of that? Do you have any advice?
Yes, I do. It gets tricky because it gets tricky because you can have private pay where you do everything yourself, where you go to a clinic and you say, hey, I've got this going on. Like my child is doing this. I want to pay for the evaluation. I want to pay out of pocket for the services. The problem with that is that it's a little expensive.
Yeah, it's not adding up quick.
Especially whenever you find out your kid needs like 2 to 3 days a week or they need OT, PT, and speech. And you're just like, okay. So the best way to get speech is through the referral system. To get a referral, though, you have to get it from your pediatrician. And I know I've met a lot of parents whose pediatricians are just like, well, we'll just wait and see. And in today's time, I just don't understand because it's okay.
Yeah.
Just keep fighting. Just keep fighting for your kid. And then if they don't want to do it, ask them to record that in the chart.
That's a good idea because like I had that happen with me and I wish, but you don't know.
I'm not like a petty person. I love the pediatricians. I would like to work with the pediatricians to help them get more information out there to the
Yeah.
parents. But at the same time, it's like parents also, just like asking your therapist for clarification, you can't be afraid to stand up to them. You can't be
Yeah.
afraid to say, look,
Yeah.
so what if this isn't a problem? I
Yeah.
want to find out.
Yeah. So one thing that you were mentioning earlier was actually defining what is a word.
I'm so glad you asked because I actually have it in the handbook. It A word is an expression that a toddler uses consistently and intentionally. So that can mean animal sounds, and I'll show you. It's directly from here for the parents that you were asking, is it parent friendly? This
Hmm.
is a prime example
Okay.
because words are like any animal sounds that the child produces, any environmental sounds, like if they every time they play with a truck, instead of calling it a truck, they go vroom. Or if they see the car, they go beep. Like we know that beep beep means car. Any partial words, which would be like whenever they simplify banana,
Mm-hmm.
say nana, or they say ball instead of bottle. Whole Some kids do have whole words like mama. There's any use of sign language that they have. Even some of their gestures, if whenever they look at you and they say like that means they want something to drink, or if they're using any sort of like alternative communication, like they point to something on a visual communication system that they have, anything like that.
So I'm gonna get your handbook first of all. So
Okay.
now that I know that it is available, is that available at the slpnextdoor.com?
Slash handbook. The slpnextdoor.com/handbook. Yes.
Okay. And then I also want to ask, do you have that page somewhere? Because I would like to, that's one question that I had to ask all my families, like, how many words are they saying? And then they always say, I don't know how many words they're saying. Or they tell me that the kid is only saying 1 or 2 words. But now that you have explained what a word is,
Yeah.
like,
It's part of the handbook because it's in context with everything that's around it.
yeah,
I
that makes
feel
sense.
like it's very important.
Okay.
So, if which I understand what you're saying. I do understand what you're saying. And I have some blog posts that are written about understanding what words are.
So
Um,
I'm saying that to my families
yeah,
because I now like I didn't even understand. I'm like, man, ain't nobody said more.
I know, and it's crazy. But something else that also confuses parents is the different standards
Hmm.
of how many words are we supposed to have by a certain age.
That's on my list of questions to
Mhm.
ask you as well. So, how many words should a child be saying by 1 years old?
I say they should have 1 to 2 intentional words.
Okay, and then what about 2 years old?
Two, they should have at least 50 words. And
50 words.
here's where I say it gets confusing because again, and this is also in the handbook. I'm referencing a chart that I made
Okay.
because as I was doing the research on this, I realized that different places have different standards. And
Hmm.
the standards have changed since
Hmm.
we had COVID.
Yeah.
So, yeah. If parents are looking if parents are looking at the CDC,
Hmm.
one word by 1 years old and should be combining words by 2 years old. Across the board, pretty much everybody agrees on those two standards. And so that's what we go off of. And
Okay.
something else to remember is that at 2 years old, if you have a child who is signing eat and then
Mhm.
saying banana, that's a phrase. Like,
Okay.
I want banana, want eat. Those
Mhm.
two simple, that's what they mean by phrasing. Are they able to pair two words together to make a request, to label something? All of those different types of things. Are they getting more intentional with their language? Are we making progress? Sort of thing.
So what about the parents that are like, I don't know how many words my kids say. I never counted the words
Taking
before.
inventory. I'm just kidding. I tell parents, like, because yeah, it's like whenever you sit down to ask them that question, they're always like, I don't know. But I will say this, if you are a parent that is looking to get speech therapy for your child, that
Mhm.
is something to make a note of at some point
Okay.
because it is going to be a question. They are
Okay.
going to ask, they're going to want to know approximately how many words does your child have? And that doesn't mean that you have to like sit throughout the day and count all their words. I will tell parents to go back and watch the videos on their phone
Mhm.
Go back, look through your videos, go back. If you happen to catch your child like in a certain like in a certain area where they're playing and they're just being like super chatty, record it and then take a note of it later, sort of thing. But it is important, especially for parents who are looking to get speech therapy. You need to know how many words your kid has. In some instances, it's easy. They're like, they have two words.
Yeah.
But
So, and I also have a follow-up question. This is from like way earlier, and then I
okay.
forgot, and now I remember.
Okay. I did
So,
the same thing.
yeah. So you mentioned speech can also be feeding.
Yes.
So when you say can also be feeding, because like I have clients that get feeding therapy as well as speech therapy. Can you distinguish the difference? Because I have a client that one of them won't eat. They get feeding therapy, but I have another client, they didn't qualify for feeding therapy based on the concerns, if that makes sense. So how do
Yes.
you know a kid needs feeding therapy versus just speech therapy? How
So
would a parent know?
it's going to be based on the evaluation.
Okay.
Like whenever you meet the speech therapist, it's going to be based. And really, it depends on what a parent's concerns are. Because a lot of times, like for your feeding client, do they have any other?
So one of the ones that I just recently had, he ended up getting diagnosed with autism as well.
Okay.
I have one that only drinks Pediatric.
Yeah. That's
I
pretty
have
common.
another one that only wants mom to blend the foods up. But the main thing that I find is what's the difference between, okay, it's an issue for you, but it's medically not a issue. Did that make sense? So I think that's for me, even as a provider, sometimes I don't know when is okay, no, maybe that's not necessarily a feeding concern.
Right. Like maybe it's more of a preference or
Being a picky eater.
yes.
Kid that's a
Yes.
picky eater, they
You
may
know,
they may not qualify for feeding.
right. Feeding is not my specialty.
Okay.
I'll just say that out loud. So I would say that anytime a parent has a concern with like your feeding and your swallowing sort of thing, you're going to want to look for a therapist that specializes in that
Okay.
because they are going to be more apt to be able to distinguish the difference. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying? So they'll be able to
Yeah.
say, okay, this is like a physiological problem, or this is because they have this and this going on. So it's just important for you to find someone that specializes in that.
Okay.
That being said, in the area where I live, we don't really have a feeding specialist. We have one or two. And so you can imagine a lot of your feeding kids still end up on caseloads with like your therapists that are seeing kids for language and speech because it does fall under our scope of practice. And so in instances wherever that happens, one of my assistants and we've been working with a little one that was a very picky eater and we ended up but he also had some sensory things going on and so we ended up doing like a sensory approach with him to just get him to try new foods sort of thing.
Okay.
So it just depends on it's going to depend on the situation. It's going to depend on a lot of different factors.
Okay.
So that would be my best advice, that if you have a parent that has those types of concerns, do your best to find a specialist
Okay.
because
And then, oh, go ahead.
because they'll be able to answer those questions for you.
Okay. And then what's the difference between expressive and receptive language?
Okay. See, now you're speaking my language. Yes, I'm more of a language and
I want to
communication.
make sure we touch everything.
Yes, it's fine. You can probably tell the difference in my body language about I'm much more confident in talking than this than I am feeding. And that's okay. Like it's okay. Our scope of practice is huge. So
Yeah.
you have to be okay saying this is not really my specialty.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can help you find somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, to answer your question, receptive language is the understanding of language, like what a child is able to understand, comprehend. For example, if you ask them to follow a direction, can they follow that? Do they understand? Okay, they asked me to do this, so I need to do this.
Mm.
Whenever it comes to like labeling things, if you say, where's the cow? Can they find the cow? That's your understanding of language. Expressive language is the opposite. It's just like it sounds. The way you express yourself, like how a child answers a question, how a child labels things expressively. Not did they understand what I'm asking and show me what it is? It's can they tell me what it is?
Okay. And then what can parents do to be more involved in their child's speech and language?
Gosh, listen. If your listeners take nothing else away today, the parents that are listening, take this. Therapy lasts an hour a week. If
Mm-hmm.
that. Some therapists, it's
30
only
minutes.
once a week. Um,
Yes.
what you do outside the home matters. It matters. It's so important. I can't even begin to describe like how important it is because we see them like 5% of the time and parents have them 95% of the time. So
Mhm.
what you do matters. If your therapist gives you some sort of instructions, that's why I say it's so important for them to not be afraid to ask for clarification or to ask for things, to ask for that extra help because it's up to them. It's really up to the parent
Mhm.
as to whether or not a child is successful quickly. You're
Mhm.
going to see progress a lot faster if you're involved, if you're actively involved and you're actively engaged and you're actively doing things outside of the sessions, than
Mhm.
if you're just sitting there being quiet
Mhm.
and not saying anything at all.
So, my last question that I have, one thing that I was told by my son's speech therapist back when he was nonverbal was
Mhm.
to narrate everything. Like,
Yes.
yeah. So,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about
Yes.
why that's important to do?
You want to expose your child to as much language and communication as possible
And it sounded
because
so crazy as I was
it
doing
does. It does. Think about Miss Rachel. Why does
it.
everybody like Miss Rachel? Because she's
Yeah.
fun, she's animated, she talks about all of these things, she makes it exciting. Do you have to be Miss Rachel for your child? No.
Mm.
Because, like you said, it can get really awkward and it's exhausting after a while, to be
It
honest.
is.
But you take it and you just sort of learn to talk to it feels like you're talking to yourself, but you're really not because they're listening. Like whenever you're doing the laundry, it's like, okay, we're gonna put the clothes in the washing
Mhm.
machine. All right, we got to add the laundry detergent because without the laundry detergent, we're gonna have dirty clothes.
Mhm.
And then whenever they're done, we got to take them out and put them into the dryer so they'll dry off because nobody likes to wear wet clothes, sort of thing. And it's a learned skill. It is, but once you do it, and I do tell parents this because it's once you do it, you will find yourself in the grocery store narrating yourself. Like, okay, it's time to get the spaghetti, even though you're putting it in
Yeah.
the cart, even though you're by yourself, sort of thing. But the reason we do this is because the more kids are exposed to language,
Mhm.
the more like their little brains are just processing it, even whenever you don't think they're listening. Because how
Mhm.
many times have you said something and
Mhm.
then thinking, oh, your kid's not listening? And then a day or two later, here it pops out of them, and you're like, what?
Yeah, and it's funny because both my sons were nonverbal last year. And so I was narrating everything. I did
Yeah.
everything she told me to do. And then it's funny because when it's like I'm in Atlanta, so traffic is always horrible.
Yeah.
And so I always say, "Oh, this is some when work out here when I'm in
Yeah.
the car with the kids." And then when my son started talking, he like, "Mama, that is nasty work." Like, so
The
your
work.
kids are
The work.
listening, you know what I'm saying, and taking it in
Yes.
everything,
Yes.
processing everything that's being said. And so now it's even still shocking to me because, like I said, even they just start talking. It'll be almost a year when both
Wow.
of my boys started talking. So just even seeing like how it made a difference, like actually we're driving in a car, we're getting our backpacks, we're
And
doing
it's
this.
right. It's not even like that big of a deal.
Yeah,
Once you start doing it, you're like, oh, this isn't terrible. I'm just talking to my kid, like
yeah.
just telling him what to do, sort of thing. I do have one more thing to add to that, though, and that is that not every child is going to be verbal. And
Mm-hmm.
that's okay because one of a big question that I do get from parents is when is my child going to talk? And I
Mm,
tell them, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if your child will ever use verbal speech. But that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean they won't communicate with you, because
Yes.
there are so many different ways that even us as adults, even us as like verbal speakers, we communicate using so many different things. We text, we phone call, we FaceTime, we use facial expressions, we use gestures, we use
Mm-hmm.
all of these different things. And your kids that don't use verbal communication, they do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes they also need that extra support. Like they need a device to be their voice, or they need a communication board. And that's okay. That's okay too. It's just really important that we figure out how your child is communicating to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
and then we build from there, sort of thing. But the narrating is also going to help that as well, because eventually they may show you something on their device that you've been talking about, or use their communication board to say something like you've been saying. So
Well,
it's the same everywhere.
I was just gonna say this was so amazing. It was very informative.
Thank you so much.
Um, yeah. So, did you have anything else? Because I know I just went off of things that I heard in some of your podcast interviews. So, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
I'm thinking I could talk to you about this for the rest of the day. I really could. Oh, okay. Something else along the lines of that narrating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever it comes to parents helping their children with their communication skills, we also want to, okay, so we want to narrate, but we don't want to like demand
Mm-hmm.
communication out of them.
Okay.
So if you're narrating something, or you're asking for your child, if you're asking your child a question and they don't verbally answer you, but they look at the object, or they indicate that they're answering in some form or fashion, I
Mm-hmm.
always say acknowledge that response, because they did answer your question. They may not have answered it up to what you expected them to answer, but
Mm-hmm.
they answered the question, or they labeled it, like they did something to show you that they are responding to what you said, sort of thing. And so I think that's also a very important thing to remember, as well as we don't want to constantly ask our children to perform for us. What is
Mm-hmm.
this? What is this? What is
Yeah.
this? What is this? Sort of thing. Just because frankly, it's exhausting. If it's something that you wouldn't want someone to do to you, you don't want to do it to your kid.
Yeah, it made me think about one of my clients. His guardian is his grandmother, and she was throughout the evaluation. She kept saying, "Use your words," and then the speech therapist, he doesn't have any words.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And I say that very gently, because most
yeah,
parents are very well intentioned. They're
yeah.
just trying to help their child. But
Mm-hmm.
it's also sort of a thing, hey, instead of doing it this way, maybe try a different approach, something a little less demanding.
Yeah.
And you'll probably get a better response. Or just parents learning to respond to their child's form of communication, whatever that looks like. Which, if you purchase the handbook, you also get a checklist for how is my child communicating.
Yeah. So lastly, I did want to ask you this too. What is the SOP next door? So it's a podcast, right? What are
Yeah.
you discussing on the podcast?
So my podcast is geared towards therapists working with toddlers, and even I have some parents that listen to it that have toddlers. And
Mm-hmm.
essentially, all it is I just talk about toddler development across like different forms. We talk about getting parents involved. We talk about what does communication look like. All you name it, I've probably covered it
Okay.
whenever it
Well,
comes to toddlers.
yes, so everybody who is listening, after you finish listening to this, y'all need to go over. It is good, y'all. I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning
And
listening.
listen, I keep them short and sweet,
Yeah,
because
you
my
do.
attention
It's like
span is like,
17 minutes.
yes, my attention span sometimes is like that of a puppy. And so, whenever I listen to podcasts, they're usually in my ears, and I'm usually doing something else. And so
Yeah,
I just try to condense it so it's short and
yeah.
sweet,
You're
so I'm not
doing
getting
great.
lost.
You are definitely doing great. So, how can listeners stay connected with you?
Okay, so I'm on all the social media platforms as the SLP next door. I don't always post there, but you can send me messages and I will respond to those. The best way to keep up with what's going on is to join the email list or listen to the podcast, because those are the two Those are the two places that I'm able to be a lot more consistent with, and they can just find out anything they need to know looking at that. You can also check the website, the slpnextdoor.com, for blog posts. You can find the handbook. You can find the links to the podcast episodes. All of those things are on my website.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here.
Thank
And
you so
also,
much for having me. I appreciate this so much.
you're welcome. And then thank you to everyone who listened today. And I will see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.